Hello and welcome. My name is Quinn, and I am one of the managers of the foster adopter support team. Okay, let's dive right in. So, first off, what is the point of this presentation? Why are we here? Um, the teenage stage is difficult. That's an understatement. It's very difficult. And the world of dog training is convoluted and confusing and difficult to navigate. Everyone seems to have an opinion, whether qualified or not, and everywhere you look is conflicting advice. So, my goal here, I have two goals. One, to help you understand what is going on with your dog, and two, to give you the skills to navigate this stage. So that when this is all over, when adolescence has finished, you have a well-mannered companion and hopefully a little sanity left too. Um, okay, so first off, what is going on? What is happening with your puppy? Dr. Kathy Murphy, who's a veterinary surgeon and researcher in dog cognition, says the inhibitory neurons of the amygdala that help to dampen down emotional responses don't fully mature until the end of adolescence. Communication between the frontal cortex and the amygdala decreases during adolescence, and extinction memory is impaired during adolescence. So what does that actually mean? What's going on with the teenage brain? If we want to break this down into more simplistic terms, we have the emotional part of a dog's brain finishes developing first. This is the emotional, instinctive part of the brain. And the rational part of the brain finishes much later. That would be the part of the brain that practices patience and focus and thinking. For giant breed dog owners, we get the best news, and that is that this gap is longest for us. So in a smaller breed dog, this might be done by a year and a half. In giant breed dogs, the peak gap, so the worst of it, is between 10 and 20 months. Some people say 8 and 18 months, but somewhere around 10 and 20 months. But it won't end until about the third year, somewhere in the third year for giant breeds. So we might as well understand what's going on because this represents a large portion of our time with our dogs. Um, and a teenager feels an emotion strongly, and they don't have the thinking power to dampen it. And that last part that was about extinction memory, what does that actually mean? It means that they are also more susceptible to bad experiences and associations becoming lifelong triggers. So we sometimes have to save them from themselves, help them help themselves. Okay, so now we know what's going on with the teenage brain a little more, but if you are watching this, then you don't just have a teenage dog, you also have a teenage rescue dog. So we need to ask ourselves, what's up with the rescue brain? Dr. Christina Spalding, in her book Stress Factor in Dogs, talks a little bit about some of the things that go into what we understand as temperament or threshold for overarousal. When we say a dog is bomb proof, this is what we're talking about. She lists 6 variables. We have genetics, in utero pregnancy, neonatal stress. So this would be like maternal care issues or just after they're born, early socialization, so things dogs are exposed to before 3 months old. And this would also be the relationships they form with their litter mates and mother before 3 months old. And then we have late socialization. Late socialization ends about that point where the amygdala has finished the main portion of its growth. So for giant breed dogs, remember this is around 8 months, maybe 10 months on the high end, and training using gentle methods versus using aversives. And the reason why Dr. Christina Spalding mentions this is because aversive training methods carry an added risk of aggressive or fearful behavior. So aversive training methods would be, of course, physical punishments or corrections, collar popping, newspaper spanks, prong collar, e-collar, things like that. Now, you may have noticed just by looking at this list that if you're here and you aren't a breeder who chose the genetics or had control over the pregnancy, then you have control over exactly two of these things, which is late socialization and the training methods used. And if you got your teenage dog from us after that period, you may have control over one or none of these. So first and foremost, I'd like to step back and say that it's important to give ourselves some grace when we're dealing with teenage dogs because some of the things are out of our control. And it's also worth noting that your dog had control over none of these. So if you're willing to give yourself some grace, we need to be willing to give our dogs some grace. Okay, so what can you do about it? Empathy is great. Empathy and understanding what's going on with our dogs is great, but we actually also need to live with them. So the next three sections, we're going to discuss how to navigate this stage, practically speaking. All right, first up, we have the foundation. The first layer of the cake here is management. Management makes the bottom foundation, and without it, you're going to see cracks in everything start forming. So, management is the changing and arranging of the environment. In dog training circles, we hear this called antecedent arrangement sometimes, so there's a little more nuance in there. Um, and this would be baby gates, tethers, leashes, crates, fences, environmental solutions, not training solutions. So let's give an example. Let's say someone comes to me and says that their dog hears a sound outside, jumps up on the bay window seat, and barks incessantly at the dogs and people walking by. What would be a management solution or an environmental solution? So we're not talking about training. We're not going to tell the dog to sit or anything like that. We're just thinking, how do I control the environment to make the behavior unlikely or impossible? All right, and an example, in this example, the answer might be that the management solution is to put white noise on. So the dog doesn't hear the sound. Put film on the windows so the dog can't see the people walking by. Put block access to that couch that they're jumping up on or the window seat. Here's an example of management that I'm currently using in my home because I have a teenage foster. And here's an example of management from a foster who currently has a teenage dog who is stealing the remotes. Um, all right, and it was really cool on a phone call the other day. I was asked, "What's so wrong about allowing my dog to reverse these behaviors?" And it was a really good and important question. I was really happy to get that question. Why is it important? Why do we care? Why can't we just let our dogs rehearse this behavior and then when they're out of adolescence, whew, that was a tongue twister, then it'll be gone, right? Unfortunately, no. So when we allow our dogs to rehearse bad behavior or unwanted behaviors, they create bad habits. So I like to think of dog training as a piggy bank. I didn't come up with this. It's a common analogy. But when you train your dog, you put coins in the piggy bank. But if you're not using management and you're allowing the rehearsal of bad behaviors, it's like having a big hole in the bottom of your piggy bank. And when you put coins in, they're just going to go straight through. So you need to make sure to plug that hole before you can start seeing progress. Another example here is if anybody has been in their home when the power is out and you're needing to move around from room to room, I do this all the time. I like to think I'm a mostly intelligent human being. Maybe I even have a flashlight in hand, and yet I'll still go to flip light switches. And that's because it has become muscle memory. So if you're training your dog not to jump on people, if they're jumping on people all the time, you will not make progress. Okay, so I want you to think now for a moment. The top two behaviors that your dog does that drive you crazy. I want you to try and imagine a management solution. What would your home and life look like if you just used environmental stoppers to stop the behavior from occurring or make it highly unlikely? Maybe it's jumping, eating out of the trash, stealing things, mouthing. What would that look like? So if your dog is eating out of the trash, maybe it's putting the trash can in the closet. Or if they're stealing things, if you can put those things away. If they're jumping on people, crating them before people come over, putting a pen around the front door. And the trick here is that if you can imagine it, you can probably make it happen. So most of us do have control over our homes and our lives. All right, so we talked about management, which is the foundation of it all. You will not see progress if you're not managing unwanted behavior. But number two, we have emotional regulation. So remember all that talk about the amygdala. The emotional part of the brain is finishing first, And it basically has control of the brain for a little while. The frontal cortex finishes last, and we don't get good communication between the two parts of the brain. So if the emotional part of the brain is driving the car, then we need to make sure that we have a brake pedal. We can ask her to slow down. Because if you might notice if your dog is emotionally excited, they've stopped listening. Um, Teaching our dogs emotional resilience, frustration tolerance, emotional regulation, that is really going to be the next layer of having a well-mannered dog. Okay, and I like to do this using brake pedal games. I like to think of it as I'm helping my dog learn some muscle memory between those two parts of the brain. Since we have decreased communication between them, I'm going to help them kind of build those neurons, work on that, work on how to communicate between those two parts of the brain well. So step one, you got to think of something that teaches your dog impulse control or uses impulse control. These are going to be things that use that front portion of the brain, the frontal cortex. So things that involve a little bit of patience, frustration tolerance, needing to focus and really think. I like to use doggy zen. That's my go-to, but you can use wait or leave it. It's worth noting that I'm going to be using doggy zen as an example in here, but doggy zen is not ideal for resource guarders. So if you have a resource guarder, forego this. Use something else. Okay, so here's an example of teaching a dog doggy zen from start to finish. And you will notice that this video is 40 seconds long because this is so easy to teach. So see that dog's really having to use some focus and patience. It's that front part of the brain needing to engage. We're helping build that bridge between the emotional part of the brain, that the instinctive primal part of the brain, and the more focused portion of the brain. I like this here. You can see he's getting a little frustrated. Good for dogs to, in small doses, in certain contexts, get a little frustrated, need to work through it. That gives them a little bit of emotional resiliency. Okay, so we teach our dog an impulse control skill like doggy zen. Number two, we need to understand emotional levels. Sometimes you'll hear these referred to as thresholds or arousal levels. I'm going to use arousal levels when I'm talking about this. And the reason being is that that's kind of the go-to language for most dog trainers. I realize that word arousal is a little strange. So in a human context, we're kind of thinking, where's she going with this? But in a dog context, it will make more sense in a moment, but it just means a high emotional state. Okay, so understanding arousal levels. First off, arousal levels are not specific to any emotion. So this is often confusing for people at first. They think I mean excitement. But a dog who is fearful but is at a 10 in an arousal level might be under the bed, shaking, terrified, scared. A dog who is super excited, who's also at a 10 arousal level, might be jumping all over you, mouthing you. Both of these dogs are at a 10 arousal level because arousal level, that term, does not care about the emotion behind the behavior. It only cares about how high that emotion is, what emotional stage we're at. I like to think of this on a scale of 1 to 10. I just find that useful for me. So one would be like a dog who's asleep, and a 10 who would be a dog who is highly agitated, highly aroused, highly excited, whatever it is, highly frustrated. Maybe they're in their crate, they're frustrated and they're like clawing at their crate, mouthing it. Um, they're in a really high emotional state. Okay, what part of the reason why this is especially helpful is once we get into these really high arousal levels, emotions start to bleed together. So this is true of humans, it's also true of dogs. So, right, this is where we have a preteen girl who's at a concert meeting her idol and she's just crying her eyes out, right? She's not sad, she's excited. Why is she crying, right? And that's because these emotions tend to bleed together the higher up we get. Which is also why sorry. This is also why I regularly get phone calls where people say to me, the dogs were super excited. Somebody came to the door. They were all happy and excited. All of a sudden, a fight broke out. And that's again where kind of we had these really high arousal levels and things kind of got out of control. So having control over this, having good emotional regulation in your dogs is really crucial. And I want you all to become experts in looking at your dog and guessing about where they're at. Many people will say, once my dog gets to a 4 or a 5, they stop being able to listen to cues. That's really useful information. When they're at an 8, a 9, a 10, I just need to take them out of the room. So knowing your dog and knowing where they're at gives us a good baseline to start playing with this to give your dog better emotional regulation. All right, I want you to think of 3 things that get your dog amped up. So maybe it's picking up their leash or their food bowl, opening the front door, playing with a toy, and watch their behavior in those contexts and try to guess their arousal level on a scale of 1 to 10. Again, this doesn't matter about the emotion. So it could be frustration, excitement, whatever it is, agitation. Maybe if they see a cat across the street and they're very agitated. You're just trying to guess the emotional level that they're at. And now I want you to think about how you can control the intensity of that emotion. So maybe instead of picking up their leash, it's just touching their leash. Maybe it's just touching the doorknob or making the toy more or less exciting. Okay, and traditionally in dog training, we call these triggers for any emotion, not just for aggression. That's a little confusing sometimes to people. And this would be time with the trigger, closeness to the trigger, and amount of the trigger, kind of the classic ways we can play with intensity. Okay, so we've taught our dog doggy zen, 45 seconds. We understand arousal levels and we've been watching. We know what level they stop listening at and what level they maybe need to just be removed from the situation at. Now we're going to start doing break pedal games. We're going to start practicing bringing our dog up and then bringing them back down. And I want you to start this at a 1. Don't try to just get your dog all the way up to an 8 and expect them to be able to come back down at first. We're going to practice this in order to, in a situation where we need our dog to listen. Maybe you have the doorbell rings, you see your dog is at a 6, they only listen at a 4, so you need to be able to bring them back down. And eventually, they'll learn emotional resilience, they'll learn emotional regulation, they'll become a dog who has good frustration tolerance. Okay, so here's an example of me doing one of these break pedal games with with my teenage foster. This was fairly early on in teaching him this, so we were only able to get him up to like a level 2 or 3 and bring him back down. In this, we're using tug and weight, but you can use anything that amps your dog up and anything that requires impulse control, focus, thinking. You can see we get the game of tug going, get a romping game of tug going. Bring him up. He's not that high. He's not that excited yet. And swap into a game of weight. So asking him to move between those 2 parts of the brain. Okay, in tug, he's in an amygdala state of mind. He's very much using instinct and excitement and very primal things. And with the weight, he's having to use very much that frontal cortex state of mind. So we're kind of building muscle memory between those 2 states. Okay. And here is a break pedal game again. This was after we had practiced a bit. And you can tell in this video, we bring him up a little higher and we're able to bring him back down. This is again using tug, and here I'm going to be using doggy zen. You can see he's a little more excited. He's a little more into it, playing a little harder with the toy. Bringing him back down, engaging that with the brain, which at this stage is so difficult for them. Okay. And then we go right back into a romping game. All right, so assuming now we have good management solutions, you've started using management to stop unwanted behavior. You're using brake pedal games, so your dog is learning emotional regulation. They're learning how to be a resilient dog. Now, what do we have next? Now we finally get into some training, right? You might be thinking, I thought this was a training presentation. Here's the training part. Um, Next, we start adding our core training cues. I find this very interesting that there was a conversation in around the 90s between some of the um, top dog certification training boards about what are the most important skills for our dogs to know. And they came up with three that they decided were the most crucial core training skills that really all other training skills are some combination of these. These are really kind of the meat and potatoes of dog training, and everything else might be like some variation of these three core skills. Okay, and these are on nobody's bingo card, I guarantee. Handler concentration, targeting, and stationing. All right, if you're thinking, I have no clue what those are, didn't learn those in any puppy class. Yeah, we'll go through them. We'll give them, I'm gonna erase a little bit of the nuance here, and we're gonna give them more concrete understandings for us. Okay, handler concentration, look at me. It's just the look at me cue. Give me eye contact. Pause, turn, and give me eye contact. Targeting, that's the touch cue. Touch your nose to my hands. And stationing, sit. That's all that is. Just put your butt on the floor. Stop jumping up, stop running around. Sit, put your butt on the floor. Okay, and these look at me, touch, and sit, they make up the bulk of every other skill we expect most companion animals to have. Now, even as I say that, I can feel that some people are going to be thinking of other things and thinking, wait a minute, no, because I have to teach my dog how to do place on a mat. Well, what is place? Place is sit with, and we'll discuss this a little later, but with duration and with distance. That's all place is. And you might say, well, what about leash manners? I need to teach my dog leash manners. And I'm going to show you a little example here. I was taking a dog training course and I needed my dog to walk in a really nice heel through lots of distractions. There was other dogs, there was cats, there was other animals, food, toys, all that kind of stuff. And they needed to stay in that heel. And I had forgotten just until it showed up. So I just used to look at me. Because as you will see, and this is why these are the core training cues, they're actually kind of the everything else we learn is really some variation of these, right? Unless your dog is an owl, and who can turn their head 360. And I know some days I think my dogs need an exorcism, but they really can't turn their head 360. Then they can't be way ahead of me and turning back to do a look at me. And unless I am an owl and can turn my head 360, they can't be behind me and also be doing look at me. They have to be next to me if that's where I'm looking in order to make eye contact. And you'll see how this kind of turns into a heel. I love that little prance. I love that dog. He's great. Okay, so how about touch? Touch might be one that doesn't seem that useful to people. They sometimes wonder why they would need to learn it. Let's see touch used in a variety of situations. So here we have touch being used as let go. We have touch being used as go in your crate. Touch being used as recall or come when called. And another example of a heel, we have touch being used in the context of a heel. And finally, a pattern that might be used to diffuse fear reactivity. So these are really robust cues. That's why they were chosen as the core training cues. And here's just a fun little video of a cat doing touch. So if I can teach a cat touch, I think I think you'll be able to teach your dogs touch just fine. Wrong species, I know, but they're cute. Okay. So, and finally, I'm going to touch on this just a little bit. So, I know I said sit, and the common question I get is, what about lay down? I found I have a little bone of contention with puppy classes, and I love puppy classes. I think they're really important. You should definitely take your dog to one. But in puppy classes, they often differentiate a lot between sit and lay down, and they sort of make a big deal about this. In fact, they usually have the dogs do puppy push-ups, right? Um, I have found that for most companion animals, most times when I'm going into a home and somebody is struggling with their dog, um, they just need their dog to stay stationary, right? That's that stationing word, a stationing cue. They just need their butt on the floor and keep it there. And if you think about a sit and you think about a lay down, both of those involve their butt being on the floor and staying there. So I actually I'm not picky about this. If I say sit and the dog lays down, I still click and reward. If I say sit and the dog starts off in a sit and then slouches into a lay down, I click and reward. Sit to me, I have a little broader meaning of that with my dogs, and that just means put your butt on the floor. Which is usually what we actually want of the dog. Now, if I'm in a competition setting and I need my dog to know the difference between sit and lay down for a dog sport or competition, then of course, yeah, we should teach that. But most people don't actually need a big separation between those two things. All right, so we have look at me, sit, and touch, and we should be rehearsing and reinforcing these regularly, multiple times a day, and always follow up with a reward. If these are our bread and butter, they are worth reinforcing. Okay, here is an example because I say do this daily, do this multiple times a day. Immediately, the human brain says, oh, that sounds exhausting. So here's a video of me running through these with my foster. Sit, look at me, and touch. And you will notice this video is 16 seconds long, so um, it doesn't take long. Okay, so some of you might be thinking, my dog knows sit, they know look at me, and they know touch, and they are still insane. So what am I missing? I guarantee you're missing fluency. So what I have often found is that there are dogs, I'll walk into a home and I'll say, okay, what cues does your dog know? And they know 10, 12 different cues, and they know them as shallow as a shower. They are the doggy version of jack of all trades, master of none. Because a dog doesn't, in dog training, we say a dog doesn't really know a cue unless they know it to fluency. And I would much rather, I find it more successful and useful for the client to work with a dog who even knows one or two cues to fluency than a dog who knows 8 cues and doesn't know them to fluency. So what does this word fluency mean? Fluency has two components, generalization and proofing. First off, generalization, a lot of people know this. Dogs are contextual. You teach your dog sit in the home or in a puppy class, and then you go outside and you need to reteach them sit. That is something most people learn in classes. What most people miss is you also need to reteach the dog, say sit or look at me with different people. So I often hear people say, my dog knows sit, but they never do it for my husband. And then they always have some reason why they never do it for the husband, right? He's not an alpha, or he's not this, or he's not that. And then I ask, well, who taught the dog sit? They say, oh, well, I did. Well, you need to generalize the cue to multiple different people, just like you need to generalize it to multiple different locations. So your living room, your yard, on a walk, your dog walker, your spouse, you need to do like a mini reteach of this cue. All right, so we have generalization and now we have proofing. So there's the 3 Ds in dog training. A lot of people know these: distance, distraction, and duration. A lot of people know these, and a lot of people still, they'll say, oh, my dog knows sit. I say, do they know sit at distance? Do they know it with distraction? Do they know duration? And they're missing those components of it. So here is a video of sit at a distance. And the reason why I show this video is because one of the tricks I found for teaching distance is if your dog knows a weight cue or has some level of impulse control. A lot of times dogs struggle with distance because where the treat comes from. We are the source of treats. So they don't want to get too far away from us. So if you can use a cup or a little container with treats on it midway or towards them, ask them to do a weight. It's a little easier to teach something like sit at a distance because you've moved where the reinforcement is. All right, so I like to think of these three components, distance, distraction, and duration, as difficulty knobs. So if one is all the way up, then you need to try to wiggle the other two a little way down, right? All three pushed all the way up, that's going to be like a calculus exam for a dog, and maybe they're only in kindergarten. So each of these adds a layer of difficulty for the pup. Let's do an example because oftentimes people know this in theory, and then when it comes to real life examples, it's harder to realize where maybe things have gone wrong. Okay, so this was something I was discussing recently with someone. They want, when guests come over, they would like that they can go up and greet their guest while their dog sits or lays politely nearby. That is their goal. And they told me that their dog knows sit and won't do it in this context. So let's think about the different difficulty knobs here. How high is the distance difficulty knob? Is the dog right next to them? And the answer is no, they're across the room. And I actually asked this person, I said, can the dog do sit from across the room normally? Like if you stay here and ask for sit, can they do it? And their dog couldn't. So they had never even rehearsed this without the guest. Is there a distraction here? So, the distance knob is a little bit up. Is there a distraction here? Yes, a huge distraction. That one's all the way up. And duration. Yes. Do we want our dog to pop their butt up every 2 minutes, every 2 seconds? I mean, 2 minutes would be great, right? Or do we want them to sit and stay seated for 5, 10 minutes while you greet your guest? And again, I asked this person, I said, can your dog do a sit for 5 or 10 minutes? And they said no. So now we can look at this situation and realize what's gone wrong. Why isn't the dog listening? And that's because this is a calculus exam. This is very difficult for the dog, and they're, in puppy kindergarten level. And we haven't practiced these things individually. Okay, so if the dog doesn't do a command or a cue, reevaluate. What about this environment is making it too difficult to listen? Do I need to think about generalization or proofing? And then once you have those three cues to fluency, so you can do those three cues in any context with any person can give those cues, and the dog can do them at a distance with distractions and with duration. Now you begin adding all your other fancy training on top of that. So if you want to do tricks training, agility, service dog training, off leash work, these all come secondary to management, emotional regulation, and the core cues. All right, we're gonna do a little myth busting here. I found that the best lives have a little bit of truth to them, and no other stage in dog training has more myths surrounding it than I think the teenage stage. That's when a lot of the myths really come out. So the first one is needing alpha energy. Your dog won't listen unless you're their alpha. The truth in this, because there is some truth, is that dogs respond well to calmness and consistency. Being calm, being consistent, is being confident. That is all helpful when dealing with dogs. The lie here is that dogs do not have a magical social hierarchy. They actually have less social hierarchy than we do. And alpha dogs in any scientific literature about wolves merely uh, are referring to the breeding male and female, the parents. So when you're looking at scientific literature and it says the alpha male or the alpha female, it's usually saying the alpha female. They just mean the mom of the litter. And so, yes, the puppies follow the mom of the litter because their food source is walking off. But that's not any sort of magical social hierarchy. And the TV show and YouTube dog trainer idea of this is a myth. And even if it were true, time and time again, studies show that dogs recognize we are not one of them. They seem to know we are a separate species. So even if there was an alpha dog, they would know we weren't it. All right, myth number two, a tired dog is a happy dog. There is truth in this. I currently have a teenage foster who is also a medical needs foster who does not get enough exercise, and it's really difficult. So the truth here is that dogs need exercise. Adolescent dogs need even more. And outings with your dog can be great bonding, mental stimulation, and yes, exercise. The lie here is that you don't want to create an Olympian that you need to keep up with. Think of living with an Olympian athlete. Trying to take a vacation on a relaxing beach with them would not be that relaxing. Exercise is good for dogs, but excessive exercise in growing dogs can create joint and bone issues later. In fact, exercise without emotional regulation can result in a dog who moves constantly and can't settle. This is actually a diagnosis in the dog training world. This is a real thing that happens where dogs who have been over-exercised and don't have good emotional regulation need pretty decent behavior modification. Um, okay, and dogs also have mental, emotional, and social needs in addition to their physical ones. All right, and an overtired dog is not a happy dog. Anybody who's had an overtired teen is understands that. All right, finally, positive training doesn't work. There is some truth in this. Humans are notoriously bad at implementing training and maintaining behavior. And the lie here is that all four quadrants of operant conditioning work. There are four quadrants, positive reinforcement is one of them. Um, I personally do not use punishment training, which is one of the quadrants of operant conditioning, in my training with my dogs. That does not mean that I don't believe it works. So all four quadrants of operant conditioning work. However, the risks associated with each vary. With positive reinforcement training, there is no risk when done properly, or certainly no studied risk, no known risk. And when done improperly, you risk a fat and spoiled dog, which, by the way, is fixable. With punishment training, when done properly, there is still an associated risk of aggressive or fearful behavior. This is often something I hear online. If it's done properly, if it's timed well, there's no risk. That's been proven false. There's still a risk. In fact, most of the studies showing that punishment training has a risk of aggressive or fearful behavior were the people, the handlers of the dogs in it, were in some sort of professional capacity of handling dogs, whether they were police trainers, police dog handlers, trainers, or just dog trainers. And when done improperly, so in the hands of the public, there is an increased risk of aggressive behavior with unpredictable triggers. We often call this spooky behavior in dogs, and it can be a death sentence for a lot of dogs. Okay, so that is everything I have on this pesky teenage stage, which is really difficult. And yeah, best of luck. Let me know if anything wasn't addressed that you have more questions on.